So we, as part of the closing events, wanted to invite some experts in the sustainability space, both within the mining sector and otherwise. And we've invited as our keynote speaker today, Lorraine Smith from Sustainability.
Merci beaucoup. Est-ce que c'est live? Oui. D'abord, il faut remercier deux personnes qui ont fait que c'est possible que je sois ici. Maria et Matthew, merci beaucoup, et à tous les organisateurs du défi développement durable 2014. Merci beaucoup. And thank you to all of you for being here with your attention after lunch, and for some incredible presentations that I saw earlier today. I think a number of the folks in the room right now are presenters. So incredible inspiration to kick off the afternoon, I think, got me thinking. And I had the pleasure of lunching with one of the groups that just inspired me even further. The presentations were great, and then lunch, just icing on the cake. Over the next half hour or so, I hope to share some ideas with you. I should come right out and tell you that I don't really have a point. So if you're hoping to sort of stay until the point and then go, you should probably just go. Although, if I can tempt you, unless Maria cuts me off before, I will close with what I believe is the meaning of life. So if you can stay for that. Unfortunately, it doesn't have a point. But there is meaning. We do not have, to my knowledge, enough time for active conversation, which is one of my favorite things in life. So feel free to track me down. There's my Twitter handle. It's your best bet these days. I can't keep up with email. I would relish further conversation, because some of what I'm about to share with you, you may disagree with, and I'd love to hear about it. You may have a new, more evolved perspective. I would greatly value that. Or you may just want to jaser un peu, which would be great. So these are my three goals here. The have a conversation thing will be virtual after the fact, or perhaps over a cup of coffee or tea sometime in our future, which would be great. I might say some things that make you a little bit uncomfortable, and I just wanted to preface that what gives me the right to be here is, to some degree, working for 10 years in the field of sustainability, working with folks like Maria at CBSR, working for a number of years as a freelance consultant, now working based out of New York for the consultancy Sustainability. A little bit more about that in a moment. But frankly, I think this is an emerging space. I have some opinions. I think I have some knowledge, but I definitely don't have all the answers. And some of the things I say are a little bit off-piste. So perhaps you'll be a bit bemused or frightened. I am going to touch on what I believe is sustainability leadership. And I'll give you 6 attributes that we think about a lot at sustainability that we really believe entail leadership. I'm also going to talk a little bit about systems thinking. That's something that, actually, how many of you have formally studied in some way, shape, or form the concept of systems thinking? Any systems thinking folks in the room? A few. Sometimes when I'm in a room with more engineering-oriented folks, there's a lot, and then I just stop and I let you guys tell it. But since there's very few, I can just make things up. I'd also like to talk to you a lot about corporate transparency. That is really a huge amount of my focus and my role at sustainability. I was delighted to see the emphasis in the Pacific Rubialis piece we just saw there, and happily it ties directly with the meaning of life. So you folks are well underway, and that is an area where I'd like to say I at least have some experience, if not knowledge. Actually, let me just keep you in suspense for a moment. I prepared a lot of slides. This will be fully available to everybody. There are a few where, frankly, the information is available online, and I encourage you to pursue it rather than me taking up your good time and eyeballs reading it on the screen. I am going to quickly tell you some things about sustainability, the organization I'm from, so I'm going to breeze through a few slides. Happily, sustainability, which is both a think tank and a consultancy, has been around for more than a quarter of a decade. So for those of you who haven't been around that long, you may not know that the internet didn't really exist then. So when it did start to exist, we bought the URL, sustainability.com. So we're very easy to find. I believe we're usually the first thing that comes up via a Google search. And all of the presentations I saw this morning, I'm sorry I missed the first one, but the second, third, and fourth all mentioned the phrase triple bottom line. Our founder, John Elkington, was the person who coined that phrase approximately 20 years ago, and that's really been the cornerstone of the work we do. So we do 3 things. I'm going to flash them by you in a second, but essentially we look at trends and issues in the Sustainable Development Agenda. We help corporate clients, and almost exclusively corporate clients, usually big companies, look at sustainability as a strategic opportunity, so we help them develop strategies. We also help them with their engagement, which sometimes means convening stakeholders. It sometimes means convening executives within the company. So these are those things I just said really quickly. Move on to the next thing. Very importantly, I think, we also produce a lot of research that comes out of our tank of thinking, our think tank. It is all open source. So our library at sustainability.com, free to the public, all day, every day. Everything we've ever published is there. I encourage you to take a look. And some of what I'm about to talk to is more deeply represented there. And when that's the case, I'll tell you the name of the document and the pages you can find the information on if you'd like some more to find out. I mentioned we mostly, there's the URL, it's so easy to remember though, sustainability.com. I mentioned that we work with a lot of large corporate clients. That's just a smattering of them. Probably some of those logos you yourselves have experienced in some way, shape, or form, if not as an employee, perhaps as a consumer, or maybe in another context as well. That'd be fun to talk about. But let's jump into the substance. In my humble opinion, everything that we're talking about here is really about change. It's about something being the way it is right now and being different in the future. And I'd like to think it's about change for the better. That's the ideal. And so what does that really mean? You know, this is an emerging space. It's changing all the time. I recently, this is a cover of Dostoevsky's The Idiot, which is my current reading. I should say I'm not a literary scholar by a long shot. This is the first of the Russians that I've been reading. I should have read it ages ago. It turns out some of the classics are actually really good. And sorry, I have a reminder that's just come up on my thing, but it's not there. Good. So as I was reading this on the subway, I currently live in New York City. I'm Canadian. I'm from Toronto, but I moved there a couple years ago because I fell in love. But sustainability has an office there, so I work there. So I ride the subway to work, and I'm reading The Idiot. And has anybody read it? A few folks. I don't know about you guys, but I'm really identifying with the main character who essentially is the idiot. And I think why I'm identifying with him is that he sort of walks around trying to tell the truth a lot, and everybody is kind of annoyed or confused or basically thinks he must be mentally deranged. That in and of itself is sort of a personal challenge. But what struck me was a particular quote that I wanted to share with you because it strikes me as, even though it was written in the late 1860s, probably around 1869 when this paragraph was written, it couldn't be more relevant today to your work and certainly anybody who treads into the field of sustainability. So bear with me as I just share a little bit of some of the world's best literature. This is a quote from one of the characters who's dying of tuberculosis, but he's speaking to the idiot and some of his friends. The best chess player, the cleverest among them, can only calculate a few moves ahead. A French chess player who could calculate 10 moves ahead was written about as a marvel. Well, how many moves have we here? And how many of them are unknown to us? In scattering your seed, in offering your alms, in doing your good deed, in whatever shape or form, you are giving away a part of your personality and absorbing part of another's. You are mutually united to one another, and, a little more effort, you will already be rewarded by the knowledge, by the most unexpected discoveries. You will at last most certainly begin to look upon your work as a science. It will absorb all of your life, it will absorb all your life and may fill all your life. On the other hand, all your thoughts, all your scattered seeds, which perhaps you have already forgotten, will take root and grow up. The man who received them from you will pass them on to someone else. And how can you tell what your contribution to the shaping of the man's destinies will be? If this knowledge and a whole lifetime of this work at last raises you to such an eminence that you will be able to sow some great seed, to bequeath to the world some great thought, then... And so on. I talked a lot during that walk, he concludes. That struck me as a great inspiration for what we do because we don't really know. Sustainability as a field, as a role, as a conversation within companies is often very hard to pin down. We don't necessarily have quarterly results to share. Much as we all talk about the business case and our pressure to produce an ROI, I don't know about you folks at Pacific Rubiales, but it's sometimes a little tougher to pin down than in other fields within the business. But we are constantly sowing seeds. Many of us are very absorbed by our work because we are all united to one another, just as people within society and then in the broader environment of which we are essentially creations. And so in 1869, I think that reflection was already alive and well, and I believe it was probably underway in other camps beforehand as well. Struck me as relevant. So I mentioned it's all about change, and sometimes it can be really frustrating. Change can happen really slowly. And yet sometimes it can be extremely impactful and happen right before our eyes. In 1930, a little bit more before my time, had I been wandering down the docks at a port of any major water bordering port city, I would have seen something that looked like this, peopled by a profession that many people don't even know what the word means. Does anybody know the word for that profession? A stevedore. A sleeping word in the English language now because they don't really have much of a role anymore. Stevedores used to unload, pack, organize all the goods as they came in crates and barrels and whatever they came in from ships, from wherever they came in whatever size. Throughout the following decades, we slowly but surely came up with the notion and integration of containerization, which completely changed the way goods are shipped around the world. And I promise you, without auditing what you're wearing, what you're sitting on, or what you ate in the past 24 hours, that in some way, shape, or form, your life has been touched by containerization. The change required to make that happen was not just to design boxes shaped like this. It required countries, cities, ports, labor unions, all kinds of stakeholders speaking all kinds of languages, transporting all kinds of goods to get it together and get it right. It wasn't easy. I actually was not personally involved, but anytime I share, I get to hear from people who were, it's just gripping and invisible. So anytime you think change doesn't really happen, remember containerization and think about your underwear, and you know it's happened because it probably came in a container ship. Change also happens fast. This one, again, a little bit before my time, but in 1961, a wall was erected in Berlin. That was not quite as fast as what happened a few decades later when that wall came down. And I remember being in West and East Berlin in 1988 as a teenager on exchange in Germany, and being on the west side where it was beautiful, all that graffiti, and thinking, wow, this wall is kind of cool. And then going on the east side and thinking, wow, this wall is not very cool. And talking to a friend of mine who'd been living there for a long time, and at this point we were on the west side, we put our hands on the wall and I said, this wall makes no sense. It has to go, just like all the graffiti. Die Mauer muss weg. The wall should go. And my friend said to me, it's just here. It's just one of those things. Look, what's happened? You know, people have accepted it. It is the way it is on the east side. People don't even look at it on the west side. They make beautiful art out of it. Lorraine, just accept it. Of course, I didn't take the wall down, but people did. They didn't accept it. It didn't make sense, and it came down in a matter of days. Something people thought couldn't happen. So we know change happens. We also know that we're looking at some pretty fundamental system challenges right now. Each one of these and more, and many of those are, in fact, they're all related, and we could have made 27 bubbles here if we wanted. These are massive system challenges that we face as society, that we face within the biosphere. And to make change in any of those is going to be complicated. It might be a combo of the containerization form of change over many decades with some flashpoints like the Berlin Wall. And some changes are already well underway. We're seeing lots of, for example, renewable energy already coming into play in the energy space. And yet we know that we have a ways to go before we are stable in terms of the way we create and use energy. And on and on. So we're really talking about systems level change here. And any of you involved in sustainability, frankly, any of you involved in just being, I encourage you to think about change as part of a system. Because I think until now, a lot of even the great efforts that companies have made to be sustainable or to have a positive role in society have often been somewhat siloed and therefore had unintended consequences. I'll give you a very quick example of what non-systemic thinking looks like in sustainability. Thinking back to the early 2000s when a lot of apparel companies were genuinely trying to deal with the issue of sweatshop labor, having been targeted by activists or having decided that if there was a sweatshop labor in their supply chain, in any case, it would be a bad thing. Great, we don't want children working in factories. We're going to go check out our factories and find out where the children are and make sure that they're no longer working here. Firing children might seem like a way to get children out of your factories, but the reason in some jurisdictions they were working there was that those were some of their better options. And so many of those companies have since dramatically altered and intensified their factory partnering process and the way in which they deal with their supply chains, because taking a very siloed effort and saying we cannot have children in our factories, in some jurisdictions pushed children into prostitution, and in other places just made them change their birth certificates so they didn't count as children anymore, not taking a system effort. Let's quickly talk about leadership, because followership, anybody can do that. What does it look like to lead? The good news is we already know what leadership looks like. I'm going to tell you what Sustainability Inc., the company I work for, thinks leadership looks like. We've got 6 categories. You could probably slice them up different ways. What I like about this one is there's a really easy acronym to remember, VGOBTA. So I'm going to take you through VGOBTA. And one of the parts of VGOBTA, the T, is transparency, and we're going to spend a little bit more time on that. Each of these, by the way, we have a pretty deep set. These are some fluffy ideas. Vision. It's helpful to know where you're going, to focus, to inspire your people, to get where you're going. Very important. A lot of things I could say about vision. I have a really deep, detailed slide with a lot of words on it. I'm going to flash past it really quickly in a few minutes, because if you go to our Changing Tack report and read pages 33 to 43, you can actually see a really clear breakdown of what specific actions a business would need to take to be able to say that it is leading with its vision. And what I mean specifically by that is, as a company, you've identified what is your role in society? How do you play a part in contributing to a sustainable future? If you have no way to articulate that, the chances that you're doing that are pretty low. For each of the attributes I'm about to talk about, we go into more detail. Goals. Are they scientific? Are they time-bound? Are they in the context of what you need to do? If you have a goal to reduce your solid waste by 45% over the next 10 years, but solid waste is the 400th issue on your issue list, is that really the right goal for you? Lots more we could say about goals. Offer. This one's actually kind of interesting and getting more interesting. Offer is about what you contribute to society, your product, your service, what it is you deliver. If what you deliver doesn't get better, if it doesn't deliver on your vision, if you are, say, a beverage company and your vision is to deliver happiness, but your product delivers diabetes, there might be a disconnect. Can you improve that offer? Can you shift it in the direction that will actually help you lead us towards a sustainable society? Can your brand, and this will vary, if you're a consumer-facing company, you have a very different brand conversation than if you're behind the scenes, but whoever you are, you have a brand. Can you use it to connect and engage, and how do you do that? VGOBTA, transparency. We're going to go into a lot more on that in just a moment. Last but not least is advocacy. And advocacy is using your voice as a company to rise above the parapet and say, we believe in ABC. In the United States, that might mean taking a stance on political contributions, the way Starbucks has done. That's a different conversation here in Canada. In Canada, it might mean taking a really active stance on climate change and saying, although Canada got a lot of interest a few years ago, it seems to be lagging behind its international peers, but as a company, we believe in ABC and using your voice to rise above. A lot more we could say about each of these. Blink for a moment as I flash by many slides because we don't have time, but know that as you see these go by, that each of these gives a much deeper dive about what we mean by this and what you can do. And there's a lot more narrative backed up by some of the leading thinkers in the sustainability movement over the last quarter century in our Changing Tack report. And just so you have context on that, why we wrote that report was not just to publish and then flash slides past you after a lunch, but because after 25 years of being in business, sustainability as an organization, in partnership with another organization that hatched at the exact same time, GlobeScan, which is a polling firm, we sort of woke up at the end of that quarter century and said, you know, we've done a lot of work. This has been really interesting. We've worked with a lot of big clients, talked to a lot of people, done a lot of stuff, got paid some money. What's changed? Because this is, again, about change. And has it changed in the right direction? Has it changed fast enough? Are we going to get there? What's it going to be like? And we didn't have such a firm feeling in our guts that we had the answers we needed for that. So we reached out to some of the world's leading thinkers that had been involved in the sustainability or sustainable development agenda for the previous generation and asked them. There's a series of videos. You can see it through our regeneration roadmap work, which was the Changing Tack report as well. So it's all there in the library. And essentially what we heard was, yeah, a lot of great stuff has happened, nowhere near enough. And what comes next for this next generation is acceleration and scale. What's that going to take? It's going to take leadership. Leadership includes those 6 things, some very specific to-dos around that. That's like a 7-day conversation. I don't even probably have 7 minutes left. Hopefully I have a few. But one of the things I wanted to do, because I spend a lot of time on this with companies, because in the lead up to this with Matthew and Maria talking a bit about transparency seemed like a good place to go. I thought I'd just take us through a little bit of transparency. So it's taking one of the attributes from Vagabta, I'm sure by now it's embedded in your minds, and taking a closer look at transparency. And in particular, for each of these attributes, we thought, well, what if you were a company and you said, yeah, we want to be leaders. We want to go there. We're ready. We get it. What would you have to do to become a leader in one of these attributes? And the area of transparency, I think, is a particularly interesting one because although they're all interrelated, it's hard to pull them all apart. It's the one that everybody notices, whether they realize it or not. It's the one that if you're doing something, people will find out about it. If you have a great vision, it will be noted. If you have goals, they will be noted. If you are being vocal, it will be noted. Transparency is really about providing relevant signals. It's about making information available. And to be a leader in that, we think there's a few things. How many of you have read or seen or been exposed to a company's sustainability report? Any company, the concept of sustainability reporting. Okay, you're very familiar. So in that context, are you familiar with the Global Reporting Initiative, the GRI? Sounds also familiar. A few fewer hands, but it's on the radar. So that would be an example of a reporting mechanism. And to that, I say, thank goodness that companies are putting time, resources, thinking into collecting information and making it public. I think that's a wonderful thing. We, through this report, are also here to tell you that it's nowhere near enough, partly because we know kind of nobody reads them. Sorry, it's a good report, but it's not getting read by more than a very few people, those in the room who put their hands up at reading them, very few others. Not really getting the signals to people who can make decisions or who will make decisions with that information. So we need to improve disclosure mechanisms. What's that going to look like? We'll talk about that in a second. We also need to explore ways that technology can be leveraged. They're related, better disclosure mechanisms, better use of technology, but just imagine 20 years ago what you didn't have at your disposal. I mean, obviously, no Google, so right there you can't find anything. No apps, right? No smartphones. There are apps being used by factory workers around the world in a lot of our major retailer supply chains. They're currently using apps to transmit labor data to the brand. I mean, this is happening today, and it didn't happen 3 years ago. It certainly didn't happen 20 years ago. How can we use that technology? That's not reporting. That's transparency. It's communicating signals in a way that gets to relevant players, ultimately to inform decisions. Last but not least, this one's a biggie. Very early days here. I think of this as like the wet gravel at the beginning of a river before it becomes a river and rushes out the big delta at the end. And this is valuing externalities. Whether you call that valuing natural capital, social capital, etc., and we'll talk a bit about that in a moment, it really is about valuing beyond your four walls and understanding how you fit into the world. That comes back a little bit to the vision. These things are all interrelated. I'm going to take you through a little bit more, and some of this is where I stop making sense, if I had made any, because a lot of this doesn't exist yet. So imagine I'm trying to explain Google to you, except Google doesn't exist. It's 1980, and I'm kind of aware that it'd be really cool if we had this way. I don't know what we'd use to do it, but that's kind of where I'm at with this. And yet, I'm pretty sure it has to happen. And I know Google did, and I know the wall came down, so it will. So today, we have mechanisms for reporting. We have the company. We've got often a sustainability team, a corporate citizenship team, a CSR team, whatever you want to call them. I'm sorry it's a bit pale, but hopefully you can see the team within the company. And that team does an amazing job of grabbing some information and funneling it to the outside world, and sometimes they get feedback, so we see a bit of a feed of signals. At the same time, and then as they do this, they put out reports. I threw up some sort of Quebec relevant reports. There are billions. You've probably seen some of these. Some of these are real leaders. This is one of the largest companies in the world, a bank in China. So, everybody's doing it. CSR team produces a report that goes into obscurity forever. Limited audience, limited impact. The greatest impact of these reports is internal. Going through the exercise of gathering the information and understanding how a company is performing and being willing to put your brand on it and make it public. That is huge. But please make no mistake that there are very, 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 very few people in the world receiving this report and going, oh, now I know what I'm supposed to do. Very few. It's possible. Actually, the one exception to that might be, now I know where I'm supposed to work. Now I know where I'd like to apply for a job. And that's worth a lot because you want talent. Mechanisms 2020, the word that doesn't exist yet, please feel free to create it at your very earliest convenience, maybe in about 15 minutes or so. The right content that is robust, all the relevant information that needs to be there, and it's factually correct, which, believe it or not, is a leap in some instances. It finds the right stakeholders, the people who can actually do something with it, who say, I needed this information so I could change something. So I could do something differently than I did it yesterday or 20 minutes ago or last year. It's in the right format, which seems so obvious, but very, very, very few people are looking for key information about how to feed their families by going to a food company's website and downloading a PDF. So somebody's got to get past that quickly. It gets to them in the right time. If it's all information from the past, then it's very difficult to change your future steps. So if information, signals, data, stories, whatever it may be, can reach a stakeholder at the moment or prior to the moment where their decision will be made and inform it in such a way that it's likely to be better than before. That change thing again. Right frequency, that'll go hand in hand with time, depending on the type of information, type of stakeholder, type of behavior, really looking for some good cadence there. Above all of this is the intention. Why is this information being produced? If it's being produced to protect reputation, then we shouldn't expect it to help people make more ethical decisions. We should just expect our reputation to be protected. If it's being made to inform people to make a more nutritious decision, to make a safer decision, to get more sleep, whatever it may be, then that intention will come through. And it's pretty rare, actually, and I talk to a lot of folks involved in reporting, it's pretty rare that when push comes to shove, the intention is to purely influence a decision-making process. And I think that's because up until now, sustainability reporting has been the focus of transparency, but there are many other ways in which transparency can be expressed. So with the right data, change for the better is possible, and I think that'd be really cool. But we need systems level change, not just one decision, one day, one time next month. We need to see some pretty big radical stuff. So just bear with me because it hasn't happened yet and you haven't done it for me yet. What would all of this look like in a systems context in that company? Well, we saw up until now transparency has really kind of been focused in one group within a company, flowing information in and out, and it kind of sits with them. But we know that within companies there's lots of other divisions. I intentionally straddled production to the outside because it's sometimes inside, sometimes outside. And there's many more. I could have populated that with lots of bubbles. And there's data flowing in between all these guys all the time, helping them make decisions. And sometimes the vision, the goals, all those other vagabtas, they're not even fully aware of what that has to do with their job. Oh, that's the sustainability guys. They come to us once a year for that data. No, it's actually theirs. They own it. There's also external folks. Again, I could have put 50 bubbles there. And they've got data flowing in and out of the organization in all kinds of directions. How can those flows of data be truly integrated? Using technology, using regular old conversations with people, how can that enable better decision making? We're starting to see inklings of it, some pretty cool stuff happening. We think of this as something along the lines of system value. So it isn't just financial value, it's a system value. It makes the system stronger, more robust or resilient. I'm going to give you some very quick examples of this where we see it already happening. Just to spark your imagination, I'm going to flash this quickly through. A company called HEC March. What they do is take existing waste data from some companies. Many companies are already tracking their waste. We're going to reduce our waste by blah, blah, blah. And they do it. Great. Good for you. 5% diverted from landfill. What was the waste? Oh, well, we have that data too. We just never published it because nobody asked us. Glass, cardboard, whatever it may be. Recycle Match takes the specific waste data and makes it available. So others who are looking for raw materials can be partnered. It's existing data, sits within the company. It's not in the sustainability report. It's spawned a new business and closed the loop. Data, already just sitting there. O-Power, electrical utility company, takes data that they already have from your neighborhood, it's in the US, from the neighborhoods there, shares it in an aggregated, anonymous way so that if you were one of their customers, you could see how you compare to your neighbors. Are you more efficient? Are you wasting money? How do you fit within the average? And the amazing thing is this was data they already had, and they're seeing an incredible downward pressure on energy use simply by showing people what their neighbors are doing. We're very competitive. Existing data. And by the way, what I'm getting at here is this is existing data. This is not some new way to go find information. This is data that already exists. Novartis, a pharmaceutical company, one of their products is a malaria medication. Sells into and or provides, depending on the cost structure, into small medical clinics in parts of Africa where the communication systems are not as robust in terms of the inventory management as some of the more sophisticated health clinics. They were having very frequent stock outages, and there was a high incidence of child mortality as a result of malaria not being treated adequately. And they realized that the problem wasn't that the company didn't have the drugs, it was just they weren't re-upping quickly enough. They just weren't getting the stocks filled. And so they partnered with a technology company and created a very basic text messaging platform that basically each clinic texts on a specific day of the week to say, this is how many boxes of this kind of drug we have today. Stock outages done, infant mortality reduced by something like 82% in the first year of that program. A radical impact on quality of life simply by providing information, count the boxes, hit send on a text. Existing technology, existing data. Let me just go back for a second. How many of you know what your pulse rate is right now? There's probably some endurance athletes in the room. How many of you know your resting pulse rate, for example, and your maximum heart rate? Yeah, a smattering of hands. So you've probably done some testing or some athletic testing. That's probably the most important metric of your life. It's data that you have had with you since you were born, since before you were born. Very few people know it, and they're walking around with it all day. That level of internal system data, there's a parallel in the corporate world that we are simply not leveraging and using to our advantage. Just wanted you to know you've already got some system data you might not be using. This is where we get to the meaning of life. Do I have 5 minutes for the meaning of life? It'll only take a minute. So many of you said you're familiar with reporting. How many of you are familiar with the movement known as integrated reporting? Does that sound slightly familiar? Yeah, fewer hands. So if you had told me 2 years ago that I was going to stand here and tell you that integrated reporting is the meaning of life, I would have organized a psychological intervention very quickly and asked me to be taken off the stage. I'm here to tell you today I have done a full 180, and I think integrated reporting is, I say it facetiously, but I kind of mean it. I think it's gotten to the meaning of life. Why? At the moment, and I'll explain this very octopus-looking thing in just a moment, we talk about, a lot of people describe integrated reporting as just producing one report. Instead of a sustainability report and an annual report with all the financial information, let's do one report. Why are we separating them? I like that in principle. Yeah, why are we separating them? How come the sustainability report is separate and talks about a bunch of separate issues from what the investors see? Great question. Good logic in putting them together. But that's actually an exercise in document organization. That's like a table of contents reorg, which is fine. You know, there may be some good reasons to do that. That is not actually going to change performance at your company unless the company is thinking in an integrated manner. And thinking in an integrated manner may mean, and this is just one schematic pulled from a recently released report. The URL is hiding under here, but it's the IIRC, IIRC.org, I believe, International Integrated Reporting Committee, who released a draft framework a little while ago and then a revised version in December to give a little bit more specificity to what producing an integrated report would mean. And don't let the words integrated and report confuse you into thinking this is about reporting. It's actually about measuring value. And at the moment, most companies measure value using things like dollars and time and sales and other stuff like that, which is very important. And so they hone in on, I said I wasn't going to use this red thing, but I am, on the financial capital that is of relevance to their business, and they signal about that to their investors. If they're not publicly traded, they signal it to whoever it is that wants to know about the value of the company. Integrated reporting notes that if you only do that, you miss 5 other capitals that may be of paramount importance to your business. If you're in agriculture, and a key element of your value chain is a crop dependent on pollinators, and the pollinator population collapses, which in some parts of the world it's in the process of doing, you're in big trouble. It's very hard to put a dollar value to that. It is a natural capital element. It's happening and it's real. And in fact, one of the companies that I work with was recently part of a legal proceeding that actually took place in Canada, suing a bunch of companies in the agriculture equipment manufacturing space because the equipment they manufacture may harm bee populations. Indirectly, because it's used in pesticide application, and now the connection between bee colony collapse and fungicide in particular is being called into question. And so this degradation of natural capital is landing on these companies that just produce machines. The idea is if you look at the 6 capitals, financial, manufactured, intellectual, social, human, and natural, and you understand how your business affects those stocks of capital as they flow through your business model and come out the other side, you will have a much better understanding of how your company creates value. I can hear you, how are companies going to do that? How are you going to calculate these things? I don't know. It's going to happen in a little while. But I do have some ideas. First of all, natural capital accounting is well underway. Really neat stuff going on in that space. If you Google it, you'll hit all kinds of stuff. Thank goodness Google got invented. You'll see an enormous amount of activity there. It hasn't settled out. I have some concerns. My personal opinion on this is I'm a little uncomfortable with the idea of assigning dollar values to things that aren't money. It's like, how do you price your children? You don't. But that's the way we speak, is in terms of value, meaning how much would I have to pay for stuff, and that's kind of the language we have. So I personally would advocate for some evolution that gets us to a more neutral way of expressing value and aligning it under different capitals. I don't know how it's going to go. All I know is that when somebody tells me this is really complicated and there's no way we're going to do it, I say, have you ever met a tax accountant? That's pretty complicated. You can go to school and get a master's in tax accounting just so that we can hand some money to the government so they can build us some schools and hospitals. We figured that out. Every year we fill out those forms right around now. We can figure this out. And frankly, I don't know if you guys are aware of this, but we don't really have a choice. So we do have to come up with a way to understand how business models affect society. And society functions within the environment. So this is where there's some genuine reason for activity around this space. I think this is kind of the pinnacle of transparency. It's going to be interesting to see where it all goes. Just wanted to quickly recap that was a brief tour through the improvement of mechanisms, so going beyond just sustainability reporting and getting to genuine ways in which we can signal to stakeholders who need the information, not just with a report or a static PDF, but other mechanisms to get better information out there. Really look at technology, which will happen in tandem with that exploration of these mechanisms, and look at valuing externalities, which is what integrated reporting is really all about. Now, I gave you the premise that if we're transparent, we give stakeholders the right information, they can make better decisions. I just wanted to get a sense from you. Have any of you bumped into information about the fact that sitting a lot, like sitting at a desk all day or being seated, is really not very healthy? You hear the expression death by seating. Okay, how many of you are sitting right now? So we have a lot of really good information. And even when we have it, we don't always make the best decisions. I used to smoke. I don't smoke anymore, but I had a lot of information when I started smoking. I still smoked anyway. We still make bad decisions. So there's more to it than transparency. I don't want to be naive or Pollyanna about it. I think it is more than getting the right information to the right people. However, when it comes to business, business is so complex that we need to be aware of how much is happening that most people simply have no idea, no access to the information. And so they either make poor decisions with a lack of information, or they make poor decisions with incorrect information that has evolved through stories or inputs that aren't entirely correct. And so it's in the best interest of business, and I think the case studies earlier today talking about that social engagement piece was such a great reminder of the value of getting insight, getting information flowing back and forth. That is the social license to operate, and I think it was the last group that said if you don't get that right, your value is something like 0. I think we're going to see that happening a little bit more. I'll just briefly close since we won't have time to get into the questions, but really, really would invite further dialogue on this and hope we get to cross paths at a future moment. So where do you fit in? You, we are all part of this future. I think there are a lot of big question marks. I would really encourage you to think about some of the things that feel like big question marks that we could say, oh, that's so complicated, it's ridiculous. And actually park that for a moment and say, well, we built Google and we have a tax system. And frankly, we built a whole industrial complex. So we are highly capable of adapting and evolving in very, very complex ways. So I have no doubt that we're capable of evolving in this way. Flashing back to the Dostoevsky quote, thinking about how our seeds move along and may inspire things we don't even find out about, I can't even imagine better symmetry than our lunch giving us trees as ways to remember this event. So what I'll do with my closing remark is let you know, as a former tree planter, that you need to get that tree into really good mineral soil sometime in the next little while. Make sure you soak it really well. Put it into, you can't plant it outdoors yet, so get it into a good pot so it really does grow. And it really will grow. I've seen those trees grow much taller than me. So make sure you put it somewhere that it'll be safe until you can dig a proper hole, plant it far enough away from a building that it won't bump into the building when it does thrive. And keep us all posted about how your trees grow and what they become. Thank you very much.